when my boss looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're just too distracting for the men in this office." I thought I misheard him, but I didn't. I was 34, working as a strategic accounts director at Hemsley Digital, a mid-sized but fast-growing tech consultancy in Seattle. I had spent nearly 9 years climbing the corporate ladder brick by brick. I didn't flirt. I didn't make waves. I dressed professionally, spoke with clarity, and brought in clients that even the VPs couldn't land. My track record was spotless, but apparently, my body was the problem. It happened during our quarterly review. I had just finished presenting our numbers. My team had outperformed every other department. I was expecting a handshake or even a nod of approval, but instead, my boss leaned back in his leather chair and delivered that comment with a condescending smirk. "You're too polished, Sloane. Too present." It's hard for the guys to focus when you walk into a room. I was stunned. My throat dried up. I blinked at him, trying to process whether this was some kind of awful joke, but his eyes weren't joking. I glanced around the boardroom. Every other manager, all men, avoided eye contact. One of them chuckled under his breath. Another stared out the window. No one defended me. "I'm not sure what you expect me to do about that," I finally replied, my voice slow but steady. "You could dress down a bit. Maybe fewer heels, more neutral colors. Keep it simple." I wanted to scream. Not because I was being reduced to how I looked. I had faced that before, but because it was coming after I outperformed every man in that room. My results were undeniable, yet I was being told to shrink myself. Later that day, I sat in my car for 2 full hours. I didn't cry. I didn't text anyone. I stared at my own reflection in the rearview mirror and made a promise I intended to keep. If my presence was too much for them, I would own the building they worked in, and I would never let another woman feel what I felt in that room. The next morning, I showed up to work in the exact outfit I wore the day before, a fitted navy pantsuit and classic heels. I wasn't going to dull myself down for anyone, but I wasn't stupid either. I knew the system I was in. I knew that if I went to HR with a complaint about Darren's comment, they'd spin it as a miscommunication, maybe offer a seminar on workplace decorum, then quietly sideline me, or worse, push me out. So I decided something else. I was going to build my own ladder. That night, after logging off, I drove to Capitol Hill and sat across from my old college roommate Camille. We hadn't spoken in years, but I remembered she ran her own VC fund now, mostly supporting underrepresented founders. "Sloane Whitaker," she said with a curious smile, sipping her green tea. "What's up? You look like someone who just got fired or just made $1 million decision." "I got insulted," I said, "and I'm about to turn that into a company." Camille leaned forward. "I'm listening." I laid it all out. The toxic culture, the glass ceiling they tried to reinforce with misogyny, the male-dominated client roster I had single-handedly grown, and the idea, bold and unshaped, of creating a consultancy firm that didn't just serve the old boys club but rebuilt the game entirely. To my surprise, Camille didn't blink. "You have 3 things most founders don't," she said. "Proof of execution, a reason to burn, and a network they don't even realize you own." She offered me a seed investment that night. 2 weeks later, I filed for an LLC. A month later, I quietly registered my first client, a former Hemsley account that Darren didn't even notice had started ghosting him. I named the company Wit & Co., not because I wanted my name on the door, but because I knew Darren would see it and recognize exactly who had taken his business. But I wasn't done yet. My revenge wasn't just about building something better. It was about making sure the people who dismissed me would one day be forced to come to me, and that day would come faster than they ever expected. I didn't make a big announcement. I didn't post anything on LinkedIn or run ads or flaunt my exit from Hemsley and Drake. I let them wonder. The first clue came when one of our mid-tier tech clients, Bluecore, backed out of a renewal. Darren stormed around the office like a man possessed, accusing interns of misfiling reports and blaming junior analysts for botched projections. But it wasn't their fault. It was mine. Bluecore had been my lead. I'd built that relationship from a cold call to a $2.2 million annual retainer. And the second I left, I knew they'd follow. Because I didn't just sell, I solved. I had made their numbers look good. Their team knew it, and they trusted me. Still, Darren didn't suspect a thing. Not yet. That changed the day his assistant burst into the boardroom with a printed article from The Verge titled, "Former Exec Launches Wit & Co., the New Face of Corporate Strategy." I was the exec. There was my photo, in full color, next to a headline that practically screamed, "She's not playing nice anymore." Camille had pulled strings, and the piece was glowing. They'd framed me as the woman who left behind a crumbling boys' club to start a revolution in client relations. They called me the silent architect behind Hemsley's last 3 years of record profits. Darren. He turned gray. His hand trembled as he read. Not from anger, from fear. He finally realized what he'd lost: not a distracting presence, not a replaceable strategist, but the foundation beneath his entire portfolio. "She took Bluecore," one of the partners whispered, "and Hextel's ghosting us now too," another added. That night, he called me. "Blocked number." I answered without saying a word. "You've made your point, Sloane," he said. "But this industry is small. Don't burn every bridge." I let the silence hang. Then I said the one thing that broke him. "You don't own the bridge. You just stood on it too long." Click. That was the night I knew I had him exactly where I wanted. But I wasn't aiming for a few stolen clients. No, Darren was about to lose everything. Darren always prided himself on knowing every move in advance, a chess player in a world of checkers, he used to say, but even the best players have blind spots. Mine was named Marlene Voss. Marlene wasn't just any client. She was the CEO of Altira Group, the multi-billion-dollar biotech firm Darren had been trying to win over for 5 years. They'd taken meetings, schmoozed her board, even sponsored a health summit in Zurich. Nothing had worked. Altira remained untouchable until me. What Darren didn't know was that I'd met Marlene at a women's leadership conference in Berlin 2 years ago. We'd stayed in touch, casual emails, a coffee when she was in town. No pitch, no pressure, just connection. She told me once, "If I ever make a move, I'll call you, not your boss." Now that I had my own firm, she called, "I want to work with someone who doesn't lie to my face and call it strategy." She said, "Your ex did that too often. That single deal would triple Wit & Co.'s revenue overnight." But I wasn't going to just sign her quietly. No, I wanted Darren to feel it. So we scheduled a joint press release. It dropped at 9 o'clock a.m. sharp on a Thursday. Front page of Tech Insider. Top trend on LinkedIn. Altira appoints Wit & Co. as lead strategic advisor, ditching longtime suitor Hemsley and Drake. Within hours, 4 other clients scheduled exploratory calls. By noon, Camille messaged, "You're on fire. Darren's CFO just viewed your LinkedIn profile 8 times in 2 hours." But the best part? Marlene insisted the transition happen fast, which meant Hemsley had to hand over all project documentation to us. Guess whose name was all over those files? Mine. Every framework, every presentation, every client success metric. Sloane Whitmore project lead. Sloane Whitmore strategic oversight. Darren had built nothing. He just signed checks while I built empires, and now I was reclaiming them. It was Camille's idea. They built their power over dinners and golf courses. Let's take it back. So we rented out the Colfax Room, an exclusive glass-walled rooftop restaurant where Hemsley and Drake had once hosted VC billionaires and closed deals worth hundreds of millions. It was their turf, now it was mine. We invited every client, investor, journalist, and board member who mattered, but this wasn't just dinner. It was a demonstration. The moment guests stepped in, they saw a branded welcome screen glowing above the fireplace. "Welcome to Wit & Co., built by the woman they underestimated." The silence that followed was delicious. I wore white, not ivory, not off-white. White, the color Darren once said made me too noticeable in rooms where men were meant to speak. Camille, bless her, had arranged everything: the guest list, the camera crew, even the seating chart. Darren's former golden clients, all seated beside me. One of them leaned in after dessert and whispered, "How did we not see it was always you doing the real work?" By 9 o'clock p.m., I had closed 2 new contracts and fielded 3 merger interest calls, but the best part, Darren showed up, uninvited. I knew he would. He stood near the bar, gripping a drink he never sipped, watching. When his eyes met mine, I didn't flinch. I raised my glass, smiled, and turned my back to him as a tech CEO said, "I want Wit & Co. on our next product launch. Name your price." That moment, it wasn't revenge. It was restoration. They built an empire on silencing me. Now I was dining in its ruins and rebuilding it under my name. It arrived in an unmarked envelope. No name, no logo, just her first name handwritten on the front, Sloane. Inside, a typed letter, 2 pages. No signature, no return address. But I knew who it was from the moment I read the first line. "I never hated you. I envied you. That's worse." Miriam Vale, my former mentor, the woman who had championed me before sabotaging my promotion, feeding Darren every one of my plans, and disappearing just as I was pushed out. She wasn't just a betrayer. She was the architect of my erasure. The letter wasn't an apology. Not really. It was a confession. She detailed how she resented my rise, how she whispered into Darren's ear that I was too ambitious, too emotional, not team-oriented enough. But the most damning line came at the end. "I know Wit & Co. is yours. I saw the launch. I felt proud and ashamed. I thought you should know. Darren's pitching to Proxima this Friday. He's stealing your playbook." The fire in my chest wasn't anger, it was clarity. He was trying to undercut me again, this time on a global scale, and the worst part, the playbook was mine, developed in the last weeks of working at Hemsley, fine-tuned in silence after my firing, and now, being recycled by the very men who told me I wasn't strategic enough. I grabbed Camille, and we worked all night. We rewrote the pitch. We upgraded it. We made it so sharp, Proxima would feel foolish listening to anyone else. 2 days later, I walked into the boardroom before Darren's meeting. Proxima had received my deck already. The look on Darren's face when he saw me there, like a ghost walking in wearing heels. He fumbled. He lied. He flinched. But Proxima didn't. They signed with us within the hour. As for Miriam's letter, I framed the last line, not as forgiveness, but as proof that the past always circles back and I would never be blindsided again. The morning headlines were supposed to be about our Proxima deal. Instead, my inbox was flooded. Subject lines like, "Sloane Maddox accused of idea theft. Former colleague claims she stole everything. Exclusive. Darren Whitmore breaks his silence. He did it. He launched a smear campaign. Leaked documents. Chopped up emails. Quotes pulled from years ago, all twisted to make it look like I'd taken his pitch, not the other way around." And the media, they devoured it. Darren wasn't just throwing dirt, he was burying me in it. For 48 hours, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Investors asked for clarity. Clients paused contracts. Even Camille looked shaken, but I wasn't, because I had proof and a story of my own to tell. That night, I sent a message to every major outlet Darren had poisoned. Let's talk. No filters. Full transparency. And the next morning, I walked into the studio at GCN with receipts. I laid it out. The internal Slack messages, the timestamps, the day he accessed my personal drive. I showed the boardroom footage from Hemsley's security cameras, including the one where I walked out holding the only physical copy of the playbook Darren claimed was his. And then I read the letter. Yes. That letter from Miriam. Live. On air.by the time I was done. The host's jaw was slack.by noon. Hashtag I stand with Sloane was trending across every platform. Darren tried to clap back, said it was character assassination, but the tide had turned. Sponsors pulled out of his firm. His board demanded an audit. He went silent. Camille hugged me backstage. "You didn't just win," she said. "You rewrote the rulebook." And for the first time in months, I breathed. Not because the storm was over, but because now I was the storm. I had thought I'd faced every enemy I'd ever known: Darren's sexism, Charlotte's betrayal, Miriam's backstabbing. Yet, here I was, stepping into the very lobby where my success had been forged. only to feel my heart twist in my chest. It was a Tuesday morning. Witt & Co.'s headquarters was buzzing. The Proxima deal had closed at record speed. Clients were calling. LinkedIn was ablaze with praise. My calendar was packed. I had back-to-back strategy sessions, team check-ins, investor calls. I felt invincible. But at 10:47 a.m., my assistant slid a sealed envelope across my desk. No return address, no logo, just my name in elegant script. Sloane Mercer. Me blood ran cold. Inside, I found a single photograph. Black and white, grainy. It showed me only I looked about 8 years old standing beside Darren, Charlotte, and another man I didn't recognize. They were at some company picnic or charity gala. The woman in the photo? Not my mother. It was Miriam. And the dated caption scrawled beneath. Someone had written, Miriam and Sloane, 2009, Hemsley Foundation Summer Program. A flash of memory surged up. I had attended a Hemsley Foundation workshop as a scholarship kid after college, mentored by Miriam Vale. I'd believed she was guiding me, until I discovered the truth. Miriam wasn't just jealous of my talent. She had orchestrated a deliberate path to groom me, gather my trust, then betray me at the perfect moment to protect Darren's empire. And here she was, lurking in my childhood photo, a reminder that her game began years before I ever set foot in Hemsley and Drake. My pulse slammed in my ears. I clutched a photo and stormed down the hallway to the conference room, where Camille and the leadership team were waiting for our weekly growth briefing. I didn't knock. I burst in, envelope in hand. The room froze. What is this? Camille asked. I held up the photo. I'm 8 years old with Miriam Vale, at a foundation event sponsored by Darren's father. Do you know what that means? Eyes widened. The room went still. She was never my friend, I continued. She was planting seeds, watching me learn her lessons, share her secrets only to weaponize them later. I laid the evidence across the table. Charity program records, Miriam's notes from that summer, emails showing how she'd leveraged my early successes to ingratiate herself with Darren. Every line a calculated move. She set me up, I said, voice tight with controlled fury. And I've just found out she's quietly advising one of our biggest competitors, offering them the very strategies I built. A murmur spread. Camille's jaw clenched. The CFO's face went pale. She's been the ghost in this whole story, I said. But ghosts can be trapped. I grabbed my laptop, connected it to the screen, and launched a dossier compiled with every scrap of proof, photos, emails, calendar invites, voice memos. We have a choice, I told them. We can let her run free, undermining us from behind the scenes, or we can reveal her before she strikes again. My team looked at each other, then nodded. They knew I was right. Over the next hour, we drafted a joint statement and an urgent investor memo. We reached out to a trusted reporter anonymously, outlining Miriam's involvement with our rival firm and her history of betrayal. BYPM, the news broke. Former mentor Miriam Vale accused of corporate espionage and manipulation at Witt & Co. rival. Within minutes, Miriam's LinkedIn profile was speckled with comments and questions. The competitor firm issued a statement. They were conducting an internal review of all consultancy agreements. And me? I sat back in my chair, the childhood photo now framed on my desk not as a haunting reminder, but as a trophy. I had turned the weapon Miriam forged into her own undoing. That night, as I shut off my laptop, I felt a deep calm settle in my bones. My past had been darkened by betrayal, but I had illuminated every corner of it. I had reclaimed not just my present and future, but my entire story. Tomorrow, I would wake up and build again. But tonight I allowed myself one moment of victory. I was no longer just a storm. I was the one in command of the thunder. The media storm didn't stop, it exploded. By Wednesday morning, Miriam Vale was trending on LinkedIn, Reddit, even Twitter. Ex-colleagues came forward. Whispers turned into statements. What had begun as a revenge plan had now mutated into something bigger. It wasn't just my story anymore. It was a reckoning. Camille and I met in her office just after sunrise. Neither of us had slept. The board wants a full investigation, she said, handing me a packet. "And you, Sloane, they want you to lead it." I stared at her. "You mean we're elevating you? You'll head our ethics task force and internal intelligence effective immediately." I let the words sink in. I was being asked to root out the same rot I had once fallen victim to. I had gone from scapegoat to shadow hunter. Later that morning, I stood in front of the entire company live on video feed, every regional office watching. My hair slicked back, suit pressed, eyes sharp. I had never spoken to this many people at once. "Some of you know my name, others may know the stories," I began. "Let me give you the truth. I was demoted. I was manipulated. I was betrayed by people who saw my ambition as a threat. But I didn't quit." I scanned the faces, some shocked, some ashamed, some inspired. I rose again, and I promise you this. No one, no matter how senior, how smart, how well-connected, will ever be allowed to rot this place from the inside out again. The crowd erupted. I had become more than an employee. I was a symbol of justice. But power brings new dangers. That night, a burner email hit my inbox. "You think you've won, but you don't know what's coming next. Check your father's will if you dare." My spine stiffened. They weren't done. Whoever was left in Darren's circle, they still had moves to play. And I would be ready. Because this wasn't just revenge anymore. This was a war. And I had finally remembered. I was born in fire. The email haunted me all night. I couldn't ignore it. The next morning, I drove 3 hours to my father's old estate, a place I hadn't visited since his funeral. A place filled with silence and shadows. He had always been distant, more empire than father. And when he died, everything his company shares, his assets, his reputation was passed on without a single mention of me. At least, that's what I was told. But the email had reopened a wound that had never truly closed. I walked into the office of our old family lawyer, Mr. Alcott, stoic, sharp, and loyal to my father until the bitter end. He hadn't aged well. His hands trembled as he handed me a dusty envelope. "This was never supposed to come to you," he whispered. "But things change." I opened the sealed envelope. Inside was a second will, dated 2 weeks before my father's death, and in it, my name, not just a mention ownership, 42% of the family company, his private real estate holdings, even the lake house I was banned from as a teen. "Why wasn't this executed?" I asked, my voice brittle. "Your uncle buried it, claimed it was a draft, said your father changed his mind." I stared at the page. His signature was unmistakable. And next to it, in shaky handwriting, "To my daughter, who fights fire with precision." He had known. My father had seen the war inside the company, the betrayal, the manipulation, and he had tried in his final days to give me a weapon. My uncle had robbed me not just of my birthright, but of my closure. He had kept me out of the very legacy I had bled for. And now I had proof. I called Camille on the drive back. "I need a forensic legal team. Private, quiet." "Sloane, what's going on?" "We're not just taking down Darren's crew," I said coldly. "We're taking the entire board. Because they didn't just try to erase me, they stole the paper I was written on. And I was about to write a whole new chapter with their ink. By the time the board realized I had a copy of the second will, it was already too late." My legal team, armed with forensic experts, confirmed the document's authenticity. The signature matched. The timeline held. And the implications? Devastating. Darren, my uncle, the man who had presented the final will, was suddenly cornered. His control over the company was now legally shaky. His board allies, nervous, jumpy, one by one, they began pulling away from him, like rats from a sinking yacht. I wasn't just a ghost anymore. I was the rightful heir. And I came with fire in my hands. We filed an injunction to freeze all company asset transfers. I didn't care if it made the news. In fact, I wanted it to. The media spun it like wildfire. Daughter left out of billion-dollar will returns with explosive evidence, the hidden heir to the Sinclair empire. What the family didn't want you to know: Camille helped orchestrate the PR assault. We weren't just fighting in court, we were fighting in headlines and whispers. In boardrooms, I held press conferences in sleek black suits, eyes sharp, voice controlled. I wasn't pleading for justice, I was commanding it. Darren tried to hold on. He claimed I forged a document, but my father's private security logs told another story. He had visited the lawyer just before his final hospital stay. And that, combined with the will's timestamp and the lawyer's sworn statement, shattered Darren's last defense. The board called an emergency meeting. For the first time in my life, I walked into that room not as an outsider, not as the emotional niece, not as the girl they once underestimated. I walked in as the storm, and when I laid the will on the table, silence fell like a guillotine. You took what was mine. You lied. And you buried my father's final wish. Now, I'll be the one to finish what he started. Their faces dropped. Darren looked like he aged 10 years in 10 seconds, because they all knew this wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution. And I held the blade. The courthouse was packed. Not with just lawyers and reporters, but with ghosts. The ghosts of everything they'd done to me. Every insult. Every exclusion. Every time they smiled while stabbing me with silk-covered knives. But today, I didn't wear black for mourning. I wore white for clarity, and blood always shows better on white. Darren sat at the defense table, pale and still pretending he had some control left about the truth buried by greed, forged in betrayal. Then he laid out the timeline, the private meetings between my father and his lawyer, the second will, the hospital records, the testimonies, the forensic ink dating, and the boardroom betrayals. That came next. Emails leaked, memos burned into the courtroom screen, Darren's own voice on recordings admitting he handled the situation before the girl found out. I didn't just win the case, I detonated their legacy. The judge's decision came fast. The second will was valid. The company, the estate, the holdings were mine. But I wasn't done. As I stood to leave, the room watching me like I'd grown wings and horns, I turned to the camera and spoke. My name is Astrid Sinclair. I was never gone. You just hoped I would stay silent. And now, I'm not just taking back what's mine. I'm building something that will never carry your rod again. Because here's what no one tells you. You don't just inherit empires, sometimes you burn them down to build your own. And as I stepped out into the flashing lights, the whispers changed. They no longer said I didn't belong, now they said she's the storm they couldn't stop. It didn't happen overnight. The headlines came first. Estranged daughter wins multi-million-dollar inheritance battle. CEO overthrown by secret will. Justice for Astrid Sinclair, each one a little louder than the last. But I didn't want noise. I wanted roots. I didn't restore the Sinclair empire. I renamed it Sinclair No More. That was the new company's name. A brand forged from everything they tried to bury and everything I refused to forget. I converted the main office, the same one where they voted me out, into a foundation for women in business. The boardroom became a mentorship circle. The portraits of dead men were replaced with young female founders. And the mahogany table where they once ignored my voice, I had it chopped into firewood. I hired differently, led differently. I even dressed differently. No more muted grace to be taken seriously. I wore color like armor, red lips, gold heels, power without apology. And Darren? He filed for bankruptcy 2 months later. Last I heard, he was living in a condo he used to rent to interns. He reached out once, some half-hearted apology wrapped in nostalgia. I left him on read. I didn't want revenge anymore. I had something better. Proof that they were wrong. That I was capable. That I was worthy. That I didn't need their name, their blessing, or their broken version of love to rise. And if you're watching this, if you're sitting in your car, in your apartment, on your lunch break, feeling erased by the people who were supposed to lift you up, let me tell you what I wish someone told me. You are not the disappointment. You are the disruption. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story hit home, subscribe. More stories of betrayal, power, and justice drop every day.